Less than 2 decades ago, the remote island was facing an environmental catastrophe caused by an explosion in rats and mice. When thousands of rats were left alone with penguins on a small island, no one could have predicted what would happen next. No one paid much attention at first, but what happened next would spark one of the most shocking environmental stories scientists had ever seen. Rats and mice were killing wildlife and destroying nesting areas. It started quietly, just a few unexpected changes, but soon the island itself began to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. So of all the vegetation, which then had impacts on wildlife, this is the extraordinary story of McCory Island and the shocking results of a simple mistake that spiraled out of control. The island, that time forgot. McCory Island sits in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the wild Southern Ocean. This 34-kilometer stretch of Greenland seemed peaceful enough, but it would become the setting for one of the most shocking ecological experiments in modern history. In 1810, when explorers first found the island, they discovered a place unlike any other on Earth. The beaches teemed with huge elephant seals basking in the sun. Groups of royal penguins made loud, cheerful noises that echoed across the coast. But what truly set this island apart lay beyond the shore. Tall tusket grass moved gently in the wind, forming dense meadows taller than a grown person. Towering mega-herbs like the McCory Island cabbage rose like leafy giants across the land. This was not a normal island. It was a wild Eden, untouched by time, where nature had grown freely for thousands of years. The animals had evolved in isolation, they had no natural predators, and their survival strategies reflected that. Petrels, for instance, spent their days over the open sea and only returned at night to hide in underground burrows. This clever plan had worked perfectly for many generations. But then came the first mistake. The island's faraway location, which had kept it safe for so long, suddenly became its weakness. In the early 1800s, seal hunters came, and along with them came uninvited stowaways, tiny creatures that didn't belong. Rats, mice, no one realized it at the time, but what followed would become one of the most disturbing cautionary tales in environmental history. Thousands of rats left to spread freely among the native wildlife, especially the defenseless penguins, would set off a chain of events that shocked the scientific world. McCory Island, once the island that time forgot, was about to become infamous, and the results of that early invasion would take more than 2 centuries to fully understand and try to undo. The seal hunters who came to McCory Island in the 1800s had no idea they were carrying the seeds of destruction in their cargo holds. Hidden among their supplies and equipment were creatures that would change the island forever – rats and mice. These weren't just pests, they were survivors, resilient enough to handle long sea voyages and opportunistic enough to make any new place their home. The rats weren't content with just eating eggs. They discovered that baby birds were easy targets and even sleeping adult birds weren't safe. And the rats didn't stop there. They ate everything they could, find flowers, seeds, fruits, and tiny sprouting plants, leaving behind a trail of destruction that spread quickly across the island. The mice, smaller but even more numerous, joined in. They targeted insects, eating larvae, caterpillars, moths, spiders, and beetles. The very threads that held McCory Island's ecosystem together were being pulled apart. At first, the seal hunters only noticed the damage to their own food supplies. Rats and mice were getting into everything, eating their provisions and making life miserable. Something had to be done. And the solution seemed obvious then. Who better to catch rats and mice than cats? Maybe it was intentional. Maybe the cats arrived by accident. No one knows for sure. But by the early 1800s, one thing was clear: cats were now part of McCory Island's fragile equation, and with them, the island's problems were about to multiply. Now the island was filled with thousands of rats, countless mice, free-roaming cats, and native penguins, all living together in a small space. What followed would escalate into one of the most shocking ecological disasters scientists had ever witnessed. The cats were supposed to fix everything. Brought in to hunt the rats and mice overrunning McCory Island, they were meant to restore balance. After all, cats are expert predators, and rodents were their specialty. For a moment, it seemed like the plan might work, but on this isolated island, where birds had never learned to fear predators, the cats found easier prey. Instead of chasing rats, they turned their attention to the island's defenseless seabirds, birds that had nested safely for thousands of years and suddenly had no protection. They didn't know to fly away. They didn't know how to fight back. And the cats didn't just hunt to survive, they hunted for sport. The cats went on a hunting spree that was beyond anything the island had ever seen. It was a massacre. They killed an estimated 60,000 seabirds every single year. That's more than 160 birds every single day. Species that had lived on the island for thousands of years began disappearing one by one. The McCory Island rail, a small flightless bird that couldn't escape the cats, went extinct. The colorful McCory Island parakeet also vanished forever. In total, over 10 types of seabirds were wiped out, some before scientists could even study them. Meanwhile, rats multiplied unchecked. As cats hunted birds, rats raided nests and devoured plants, worsening the ecological imbalance. The very plan to fix the problem had backfired. In 1878, another misstep occurred. Following old maritime traditions, rabbits were released on the island as a food source for stranded sailors. But without predators and with endless vegetation, the rabbits reproduced rapidly. By 1968, their numbers exceeded 100,000. These rabbits devastated the island's greenery, eating mega-herbs, tusket grass, and plant roots. Hillsides eroded as vegetation vanished, and the once lush landscape deteriorated into a barren wasteland. But worse was coming. The combination of rats and rabbits was about to devastate one of the island's most iconic inhabitants, penguins. By the mid-1900s, McCory Island was unrecognizable. The vibrant landscape had transformed into patches of eroded soil and stubby remnants of former plant life. Rabbits had destroyed nearly 40% of all vegetation, even digging through soil for food. The once green hills turned into a crumbling moonscape. In September 2006, disaster struck. A massive landslide at Lusitania Bay, triggered by erosion and rabbit activity, buried hundreds of king penguins alive. It was a global wake-up call and a point of no return. Scientists visiting the island were shocked. Rats thrived in this chaos. With cats nearly eradicated, their numbers soared to 36,000. They devoured eggs, seeds, and anything edible. Mice reached over 100,000, compounding the destruction. Realizing the cats were a threat, authorities launched a major eradication campaign in 1985. By 2000, 479 cats had been removed. The island was finally cat-free. For a brief moment, hope returned. Bird species like blue and gray petrels began reappearing. But nature had one last twist. With predators gone, the rabbit population exploded to over 300. Zero. They devoured every plant in sight, stripping the island bare. Without vegetation, hillsides and cliffs collapsed into the sea. By 2007, the island was on the brink of collapse. The Australian and Tasmanian governments agreed. To save the island, every invasive species had to be removed, every rat, mouse, and rabbit. It would be the largest wildlife eradication effort in history, costing over $24 million and requiring years of coordinated action. A virus called myxomatosis had been used in 1,968 to reduce their numbers, but it wasn't enough. In 2011, scientists deployed rabbit Kalishi virus, rabbit hemorrhagic disease, using virus-laced carrot bait in high-density areas. The virus tore through the population swiftly, causing a dramatic crash. Next came a massive aerial operation. Helicopters dropped 300 tons of poison bait across the island. The timing was critical winter, when most native birds had left to minimize accidental harm to native species. But spreading poison wasn't enough. Thousands of carcasses had to be collected to prevent scavengers from being poisoned. Teams spent months clearing dead rabbits and rodents from every corner of the island. Still, the biggest danger lay in what might remain hidden. Even one surviving rat or rabbit could undo everything. That's when the final phase began, the deployment of detection dogs. In 2011, 12 elite dogs and their handlers arrived. These weren't ordinary animals. They were trained to detect the scent of a single rat or rabbit, even in McCory's harsh terrain. They would search for survivors hidden in caves, cliffs, and dense vegetation. By 2013, no traces of rats, mice, or rabbits had been found for months. But no one declared victory. Not yet. The island had taught hard lessons about patience and certainty. 3 additional dogs were brought in to continue the search. Everything the poisons, the virus, the hunts, had built toward this moment, one final push to restore what had once been lost. The shocking results of leaving thousands of rats alone with penguins on a small island had pushed nature to the brink. Now, at last, it seemed that nature might finally be getting a second chance. On April 8, 2014, McCory Island was officially declared pest-free for the first time in over 200 years. After 7 years of the most intensive eradication project in conservation history, not a single rat, mouse, or rabbit remained. This milestone followed a 2-year waiting period with no sightings of invasive species. Detection dogs had searched every possible hiding place, and sensitive monitoring devices were placed across the island, but declaring success was only the beginning. The true challenge was whether the ecosystem could recover from 2 centuries of damage. Then came a surprise. The first signs of life emerged from the soil. Plants once protected in fenced areas began growing freely. Seeds that had lain dormant for decades sprouted spontaneously, transforming the barren landscape into a green oasis. Melissa Houghton, the dog handler who had discovered the last rabbits, stayed on the island to witness its transformation. The desolate, pretty paddock began to look wild again. Towering tusket grass returned, and the iconic mega-herbs slowly reclaimed the terrain. Within a few years, parts of the island were unrecognizable from their eroded past. Even more remarkable was the response from the birds. Species that had been clinging to existence began nesting again. White-headed petrels, nearly extinct in 2001, rebounded quickly. Blue and gray petrels, once gone from the main island, returned to form new colonies. The birds kick-started a powerful feedback loop. Their droppings enriched the soil, helping plants grow faster. In turn, the restored vegetation provided better nesting cover, attracting more birds and accelerating the island's recovery. What had started as a catastrophic ecological failure was now becoming one of the greatest success stories in conservation history. A decade after being declared pest-free, scientists returned to measure the recovery and were stunned by what they found. The transformation wasn't just successful, it was faster and more complete than anyone had predicted. McCory Island had gone from a barren ecological disaster to a thriving sanctuary. The tusket grass grew so tall and dense that scientists had to push through it like explorers in a jungle. Beneath it, penguin tunnels carved through the undergrowth like nature's highways. Even the rarest plants made a dramatic comeback. The 2 orchid species that had clung to life in fenced plots were now spreading across the island. Hupersia australiana, once down to a few individuals, began appearing in new locations each year. Today, McCory Island supports more native wildlife than it has in over 150 years. Bird populations are growing by 10% annually, an extraordinary rate in conservation. What began as an emergency operation to undo environmental damage has since inspired similar efforts worldwide. Let us know in the comments and share this story to remind others of what's possible when we fight for the planet.